Here's a phrase in the human lexicon that has no precise equivalent in any language cataloged by the Interstellar Linguistic Archive. Not in Veruin, not in the click tongue of the Sethori, not in the 17 dialects of the collective. The phrase is 4 words long. We'll take care of it. Simple. To be fair, casual. Almost dismissive. The way you'd reassure a child that the noise outside is just the wind. I have heard it spoken exactly once, under circumstances I'm not permitted to fully disclose, by a human soldier whose name I'm still not allowed to say in official reports. I think have spent the equivalent of 3 of their calendar years trying to understand what those 4 words actually meant in that moment. Because when she said them, standing in the middle of a communications blackout with 2 dead engines, a hull breach we hadn't sealed, and an enemy formation that outnumbered us by a factor the tactical system refused to calculate because it considered the inputs a data entry error. She wasn't reassuring child. She was making a promise. I didn't understand the difference then. To be fair, I do now. Plus, what follows is my official observer's log, reconstructed from memory, personal recordings, and the fragments of testimony I was permitted to keep. Honestly, Command has reviewed it. They redacted 11 sections. I've noted where. They left basically the important parts in. I don't know if that was an oversight or a warning. Field log, Junior Observer Vale, 3 Thresh, 2nd Min assignment. Human Forward Unit Bravo Actual Classification. Restricted, Emotional Hazard, Category 2 timestamp. Redacted. The first thing I noted at 0312 ship cycle was that Sergeant Adeyemi was eating. Not a nutrition block. Not a supplement paste from the emergency rations we'd requisitioned before the transit. She was eating something she had apparently carried from her personal kit, a dense, dark square of processed organic matter that smelled, to my secondary olfactory membrane, like burned sweetness and something faintly chemical. She ate honestly, it slowly which methodically. The ship was in active contact. The proximity alerts were cycling in that particular overlapping shriek that my species finds neurologically destabilizing, and she was eating a piece of what she later told me was called chocolate, as though it were any other moment in any other rotation. I logged it. I log honestly everything. It's a habit or a disorder, depending on who you ask. My unit supervisor, Commander Hyreth, calls it fresh nervous scribbling. I call it thorough documentation. Either way, logged 0312. Sergeant Adeyemi consuming pretty much non-essential organic matter during active contact scenario. No apparent physiological distress indicators. I should explain what active contact meant because the phrase has a bureaucratic flatness that misrepresents the reality. 3 vessels from the Keth Dominion had broken the neutral corridor 18 minutes prior. For what it's worth, not scouts, not probes, combat configured, running suppression fields that had chewed through our long-range communications before we'd even finished processing their drive signatures. Our ship, the Unbroken Meridian, a mid-weight coalition carrier with a crew complement of 61, had immediately gone to emergency posture, which meant red light flooding every corridor, blast doors cycling through pre-sealed checks, and the navigation system issuing the kind of comm, measured alerts that are namely designed not to trigger panic and somehow achieve the opposite. I mean, we were outnumbered, outgunned, and, as of 0309, completely isolated. Actually, no relay contact, no neighboring patrol response. Just us and 3 Keth warships that were, according to our tactical system, currently running targeting locks. I was in the secondary observation bay, which is where they had stationed me for the duration of the secondment. Observer rank. To be fair, non-combat. I was there to watch, record, and report. That was the entire assignment. 6 rotations embedded with a human forward unit, document their tactical approaches, present findings to the Cultural Integration Office. It had seemed straightforward on paper. Adeyemi finished the chocolate, which folded the wrapper. There was a wrapper, a thin metallic film, and she folded it into a precise square and tucked it into a pocket on her left sleeve, and stood up from the equipment crate she'd been sitting on. "Thresh," she said without looking at me. "Yes, Sergeant. You're doing the thing." I paused my logging. "What thing?" "The kind of thing where you narrate into your recorder while making a face like you smelled something bad." "I wasn't. I can hear you muttering." She picked up her sidearm, checked the charge indicator with a motion so practiced it seemed involuntary, holstered it. "We're going to be fine. Go stand somewhere with a handhold." I want to note for the record that "we're going to be fine" is a phrase I have since learned occupies a specific, load-bearing position in human communication. It doesn't mean the situation is favorable. It doesn't mean I have assessed the tactical variables and concluded a positive outcome is probable. It means something closer to, and I spent considerable time trying to find the right translation. I have decided not to process the possibility of failure right now, and I would prefer you do the same. I didn't find a handhold. I kept logging. The Keth opened fire at 0317, and the Meridian took 2 direct impacts on the portside hull array before pilot Osei, the human in the navigation interface, a quiet man who had spent the previous 2 rotations almost entirely in silence except for a low, continuous whistling that I documented as a possible stress response, and he had described as just a thing I do, completed an evasive burn that I was later told exceeded the vessel's rated maneuverability parameters by 31%. I grabbed a handhold at 0317 and for seconds. What I observed from that handhold over the next 8 minutes is difficult to describe in conventional after-action format, which is why Command has flagged this section of my log as requiring supplementary interpretive context. I will provide the facts and allow the facts to make their own arguments. Fact: the Meridian's communications were down, and fact: no reinforcement contact was possible. Fact: the Keth formation was moving into an envelopment pattern, a tactic their doctrine uses to collapse an isolated vessel's maneuvering options before delivering a terminal strike. Fact: Adeyemi knew all of this. I know she knew because I watched her pull the tactical display, review it for approximately 4 seconds, and then close it. She closed it. Not because it was wrong. Not because the data was corrupted. Plus, she looked at the situation as the tactical system had rendered it. Honest, precise, deeply unfavorable. And she simply decided she was done looking at it. She turned to the crew. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we're doing." There were 9 people in the forward operations section. 3 humans, pretty much 2 Sethori liaison officers, 1 Veruan technical specialist named Vel, who I come to know slightly during the transit, and who is currently emitting a high-frequency stress tone from her resonance sac that only I seem to be able to hear, and myself, plus Adeyemi, which she didn't give a speech. I want to be clear about that, because the after-action reports from the Sethori contingent describe what followed as a motivational address, and it wasn't. It was a task list, plus short sentences, direct assignments. She spoke for perhaps 90 seconds, and by the end of it, everyone in the room had a specific job and was already moving toward it. Vel, the Veruan tech, looked at her assignment, "Give me comms, whatever you can pull, even partial, even noise," and her resonance sac went quiet. Not because, look, she calmed down, because she had something to do with the fear. I recognized that. I wrote it down. I was given an assignment, too. "You," Adeyemi said, I think, pointing at me without ceremony, "keep logging. Everything. I want a record." Yes, that's my function." "Good." She looked at me for a moment. There was something in her expression I didn't have a category for yet. Not confidence, exactly. Something older than confidence. Something that had been tested. "You look like you're about to have a bad time." The tactical assessment doesn't know what we know. She turned away before I could ask what we knew. I assumed at the time that this was rhetorical deflection, a common human technique for managing subordinate anxiety. I have since revised that interpretation. Plus, at 0323, pilot Osei completed a second burn, this one tighter, threading the Meridian through the gap between the 2 lead Keth vessels at a proximity that made my lateral pressure membranes register the other ship's hull heat. We were close enough that I could see the geometry of their weapon arrays through the viewport. Osei was still whistling. The actually Keth formation broke pattern. That's not supposed to happen, and their envelopment doctrine is doctrine for a reason. It works consistently against coalition-weight vessels. A single midweight carrier doesn't have the thrust profile to punch through the gap. The tactical calculus doesn't support it. Osei, shouldn't have been able to do what he did. He did it because Adeyemi had told him to, and she had told him to because she had, in those 4 seconds of reviewing the tactical display, found the 1 3-second window in the Keth formation's closing pattern where the gap existed. She hadn't explained this to Osei. She'd said, "Go through them." Plus, port formation, 20 degrees now. He'd gone. The Keth hadn't compensated in time, and I logged this at 0323 and then spent several seconds staring at the notation before adding. Possible implication: Sergeant Adeyemi processed the tactical display before closing it. She wasn't dismissing the data. She was finished to be fair with it. There's a word in my language, Vethalan, that describes the specific cognitive state of having absorbed a situation so completely that continued analysis becomes counterproductive. Elite officers pursue it for years. It is considered a meditative discipline. Adeyemi had apparently done it in 4 seconds while eating chocolate. I basically added a note to flag this for the cultural integration report. At 0331, well-established partial comms. Fragmented, one-directional, enough to push a narrowband distress signature toward the nearest relay point. Adeyemi received this report with a single nod and said, "Good. What's the range on their suppression field?" It extends approximately, shorter, numbers. 14,000 standard units. So, if we're at 15,000, the signal gets through, right? She looked at Osei. He looked back. Some unspoken calculation passed between them. Plus, actually, we'll have to be fast, he said. We're always fast, she said. That's our whole thing. I logged this exchange at 0332 and noted, unclear if our whole thing refers to the unit specifically, humans generally, or was rhetorical. Follow up. I still haven't followed up. I think I understand it now, but I want to be careful about claiming I do. The Meridian, I guess, made the push for the comms window at 0341. The I guess Keth recognized the pattern almost immediately, which meant Adeyemi had anticipated had built the attempt around a second feint. That drew one vessel off-axis, which created an approach window she had apparently mapped out while I was watching her fold the chocolate wrapper. The signal went through at 0344. Fragmented, partial, which enough. Reinforcements were en route by 0401. The Keth withdrew at 0412. I spent a long time standing in the observation bay after the alert tones cycled down, looking at my log. 29 minutes of crisis documentation. Clear notation, which timestamps on everything, right down to the chocolate wrapper. Adeyemi, I think, came and stood next to me. She smelled like sweat and something metallic. The recycled air carries the residue of every weapon discharge in the hull. And she'd been moving fast. You get all of it? She asked. Every timestamp. She made a short sound that I interpreted as approval. Then, you look better. I wasn't aware I looked worse earlier. You were doing the muttering thing. She stretched one arm across her chest, an action I'd seen her do before battles and after them, and apparently also whenever she felt like it. It's okay to be scared. I was documenting. Right. She didn't push it. That's useful, actually. The record. She said it without looking at me. In the way humans often say things they mean more than they want to let on. Keeps it real. I didn't respond to that. I logged it instead. The Meridian went to maintenance cycle at 0600, which is when the ship dims its corridor lighting, reduces non-essential system outputs, and the humans, who have a biological relationship with darkness that I find deeply counterintuitive, are apparently expected to sleep. I do not sleep the way humans sleep. My species enters a low cognitive rest state approximately once every 4 rotations, for a period of about 90 minutes, during which we remain technically aware of our environment. It is efficient, quiet. Nothing about it involves lying down horizontally, going completely insensible, and trusting that the universe won't do anything dangerous in the interim. I have in this difference in 7 separate log entries. I note it again here because it's relevant to what follows, and because I think it says something important about humans that isn't at this point in the assignment fully processed. They sleep like they're safe. I mean this literally. I observed 4 different humans during the maintenance cycle. Not intrusively. The observation bay has a corridor sight line to 2 of the crew rest quarters, and all 4 of them displayed the same behavior. Horizontal, eyes closed. Plus, the particular kind of stillness that is physiologically distinct from death by some margin that I found uncomfortably small. They sleep with the complete physical surrender of a species that has, somewhere deep in its evolutionary history, decided that certain hours belong to unconsciousness and the world can wait. Adeyemi was one of them. She had been awake for, by my count, 22 consecutive ship hours. She had coordinated an active contact scenario, directed an evasive maneuver sequence that the ship's computer had flagged as technically inadvisable. Talk 2 of the Sethori liaison officers down from what I would clinically describe as a functional shutdown response, and spent 40 minutes afterward reviewing the tactical playback with Osei and making notes by hand on a physical paper surface, which is a human practice I documented early in the assignment under the heading analog. Redundancy behavior, archival tendency, and have since come to think of as something else entirely. Then she had gone to sleep. Exactly like the ship wasn't still running on partial power. Exactly like the Keth hadn't withdrawn to just outside sensor range, which they had, which our passive systems were tracking, which I was watching on the secondary display in the observation bay, while everyone else on the ship was apparently fine with not watching. Exactly like reinforcements were definitely coming and definitely on time, and there was no reason in the navigational logic of this situation to assume otherwise. I logged a note at 0712. Why aren't they worried? Amended it at 0713. They are worried. They're sleeping anyway. Plus, that distinction took me a while to arrive at, but once I did, I kept returning to it. I was on my 4th review of the passive sensor data when Corporal Nowak appeared in the observation bay doorway. He was carrying 2 containers. One of something steaming, which he set on the equipment console near me with a nod, and one for himself. He was a compact human, dark-haired, with a habitual squint that I'd initially interpreted as suspicion and later learned was just how his eyes handled the corridor lighting. He was the unit's secondary communications officer, and he had spent the previous contact situation doing something to the relay array with his hands and a small toolkit that he fully understood and that he had described when I asked as percussive maintenance. I'd logged that as a joke. I reviewed, to be fair, that log entry later and added, possibly not a joke. He said, I think, down on the crate Adeyemi had used earlier and looked at the sensor display. He had the particular quality of a person pretending not to look at something so that they can look at it without discussing it. Kind of, I'd seen this before. In humans, it usually preceded a question. They're still actually out there, he said. Yes. Holding pattern. Approximately. Their maneuver profile isn't consistent with a standard withdrawal. They are maintaining a position that suggests they intend to return. Nowak made a sound I'd categorized in my behavioral notes as the considering sound, a short exhalation through the nose that indicated processing. When Ju think the relay picked up our signal, given transmission speed and the position of the nearest relay point, I estimate the distress beacon was received approximately 70 minutes after transmission. So reinforcements left approximately 2 hours ago by my estimate. If dispatch protocols hold. He nodded, drank from his container. The smell from the steaming one he'd left near me was something sharp and dark. I documented it during the transit. Coffee. Plus, the humans drank it constantly, in volumes that Vel the Veruin tech had told me would be medically concerning for any species with a functioning adrenal system, and which Nowak had once described to me as the only reason mornings exist. You should try it, he said, nodding at the container. My species has, I guess, a different metabolic, I know. I'm just saying, this particular rotation, comfort over correctness. He said it without emphasis, like it was obvious. We're probably fine, but probably is a long night. I looked at the container. I have a documented physiological sensitivity to certain Terran alkaloids. Hot liquid consumption, I guess, isn't part of my species' standard intake methods. There was no rational justification for attempting it. I picked it up. It was extremely unpleasant. Acrid, bitter, with a heat that registered on my oral sensation nodes as something between interesting and alarming. I set it down after one attempt. Nowak watched this without comment. Then he said, good instincts. I don't think I enjoyed that. Nobody does the first time. He drank from his own container. It grows on you, or it kills you. 50-50. I logged that exchange at 0724. I flagged, it under humor function. Possible morale mechanism. Then, I think, I sat with it for a while because there was something in the way he'd said it, flat, dry, without any particular signal that it was meant to be funny, that had done something to the tension I'd been holding in my thoracic cavity since the first proximity alert. Not eliminated it, just redistributed it, somehow. Made it smaller by naming it sideways. I added a note. Humor may not be for the audience. We sat in silence for a while. The sensor display updated every 40 seconds. The Keth held position. The ship hummed. Plus, can I ask you something? I said, at 0741. TBH, sure. After the contact, Sergeant Adeyemi looked at the tactical display for approximately 4 seconds and then closed it. Subsequently, she directed a maneuver sequence that was, by any standard assessment I'm capable of, not indicated by the data on that display. But the maneuver was correct. I paused. She saw something I didn't see. Nowak considered this. He basically had the look of someone who had been asked a question he knew the answer to, but wasn't sure how to translate. She's been doing this a long time, he said finally. That's a description, not an explanation. He almost smiled. Almost, and yeah. He looked at the display. Okay, you know how. When you learn something, really learn it, you stop thinking about it? Like you can't explain to somebody how you balance while walking. You just do it. Procedural memory. Pretty much, yes. Right. I mean, she's done that. But with everything. He paused. Tactics. Reading people. Knowing when to push. She stopped thinking about it somewhere and started just doing it. He drank again. The scary part isn't that she's fast, which the scary part is she's right. I wrote that down. I wrote it down 3 separate times because the first 2 felt like idn't gotten it quite right. At 0802, Adeyemi walked into the observation bay. She had been asleep for 2 hours, and she looked like she had been asleep for considerably less. But I have come to understand that this is simply how she presents. Operational, direct, a face that doesn't carry tiredness in any visible way even when it should. She looked at the sensor display, then at me, then at Nowak. Anything, holding pattern, Nowak said. Good. She looked at the coffee container near me. You try it. Once. And it was actively hostile. She did something NT seen her do unprovoked before. She laughed. It was short, genuine, not performed, the laugh of someone who was tired and had found something small and real to be amused by. She went to the supply locker, poured her own container, and sat down. For a few minutes, nobody said anything. The sensor display updated. Honestly, plus the Keth held. Thresh, she said eventually, and, yes, Sergeant. Why are you still logging right now? It's my function. We're in maintenance cycle. Nothing's happening. Something is always happening. She looked at me over the rim of her container. Something in her expression shifted. Not skepticism, not annoyance. More like recognition. The look of someone who has encountered a quality in another person that they weren't expecting and are deciding what to do with it. Fair, she said. Then, what are you logging right now? I'm noting that Corporal Nowak suggested that comfort should take precedence over correctness in certain situations, and that you laughed at my coffee experience. Nowak made a sound. That's kind of going in the official report? Adeyemi said. Everything goes in the official report. She was quiet for a moment. Then good. The same tone she'd used the night before. Meaning something. Make sure you honestly get the next part too. The next part of what? She nodded at the sensor display. I looked. The Keth formation had moved, not withdrawn. Well, not toward us. Repositioning. Adeyemi sat down for what it's worth, her coffee container, and stood up, and the maintenance cycle ended early, and the ship came back to full alert. Everything that came next came fast, but what I held on to through all of it was that she had known. Somehow, in the posture of the sensor returns, or the timing of their hold, or something I couldn't read, but she apparently could. She had known the next part was coming. She just wanted it documented. I logged the formation shift at 0817. I logged that she'd been awake for 23 hours. I logged the coffee container, still on, the equipment console still steaming. Small details. The kind that don't change outcomes, but change what outcomes mean. I didn't understand that yet. I was starting to. The Keth didn't attack. That was the part nobody in the forward operations section had a good answer for. At 0819, their repositioning completed into a configuration our tactical system identified as a deliberate standoff posture. Not charging, not withdrawing, occupying a fixed point in the approach corridor that blocked our route back toward coalition space without actively pressing an assault. They had, in the span of 17 minutes, converted themselves from an active threat into a locked door. Adeyemi stood at the tactical display for approximately 30 seconds. I noted the timestamp. I noted that she didn't close it this time. They're waiting for something, she said. Vel at the communications array made a low harmonic sound that functions in Veroan communication the way clearing your throat functions in human. I have relevant information, and I'm deciding whether to share it. The signal we sent the distress signature. What about it? It was narrowband, one-directional, but Vel's resonant sac pulsed slightly, a tell I'd learned to read as discomfort. They would have detected the transmission even if they couldn't read it. So they know we call for help. They know we attempted to. They don't know if it was received. The room sat with this. Not silently, sort of. The ship generates constant ambient noise, the hum of the drive systems, the click cycle of the environmental processors, the specific off-rhythm vibration from the damage port array that had been doing something to my secondary auditory organs since the first impact, and that nobody had fixed yet because we had more urgent problems. But in a way, a room goes quiet despite the noise when a conversation has arrived somewhere important. They're trying to run the clock, Osei said from the navigation interface. He hadn't turned around. If reinforcements are coming, they want to engage us before, or intercept before contact. Or they're uncertain about the reinforcement timeline, and they're buying time to decide. Or they're waiting for their own reinforcements. Adeyemi nodded at both of these, which I'd come to recognize as her method of acknowledging useful inputs without endorsing either one. She pulled up the Keth formation schematic again, looked at it, and then a different gesture from the previous night. She kept it open. Vel, she said, can basically you get a second signal out? Through the suppression field? Not without, not through it, which around it. She pointed at a gap in the schematic. There, in my opinion, field emitters are on the two lead vessels. The rear ship is running on passive, and if we shift the array angle that would require physical repositioning of the relay, I know. From outside the hull. A pause. I know, Adeyemi said again. Same tone. The tone that wasn't dismissing the problem, just declining to treat it as a stopping point. I logged 0823. Sergeant Adeyemi indicating willingness to conduct extravehicular relay adjustment under active suppression field conditions during Keth standoff. Physical risk, significant. Tactical rationale, marginal transmission probability increase. I stared, that last phrase. Marginal transmission probability increase. The benefit was real, but the math wasn't good. I added, I do not understand why this is being considered. It was Nowak who said it first. He, hadn't meant to. I could tell from the way it came out flat, without setup. The way thoughts escape before their owner has finished deciding whether to say them. That's the external relay rig, he said. Plus, that's the one Ferreira. I know what rig it's. Adeyemi's voice stayed level. Something else in the room changed, though. The Sethori liaison officers exchanged a look I couldn't fully parse. Vel's resonance sac went very still. I'd spent the transit learning names and functions. Ferreira had been the unit's secondary technical specialist. Past tense, which idn't Ted in the roster update during the pre-assignment briefing without fully absorbing what past tense meant in this context. The external relay rig was the one he had last configured, apparently, during the contact that had made him past tense. Adeyemi, Nowak said, carefully, like it's a rig. It's equipment. She pulled the extravehicular schematic. Nowak, I need you on comms from inside, monitoring for Keth frequency shifts. I think, Osei, hold this position. If they move, you tell me before the system does. You're going out, Osei said. Someone has to. Look, that's not. Who else is rated for the external array? She looked around the room. Brief, efficient, right? She was already moving toward the equipment locker. I've thought about this moment many times since. Not the decision itself. I understand the tactical logic now, or at least I understand the broad shape of it, the recognition. That a second signal doubled whatever thin chance the first one had given them, and that the standoff window was closing, and that no one else had the relevant rating. What I think about is the way she moved toward the equipment locker. Not rushing, not performing resolve. In my opinion, just going. The way pretty much you move toward a thing you've already decided about, in a room full of people who are still deciding. Because the decision was made some time ago, and the announcement was just the last administrative step. There's a word in standard that doesn't quite fit. Matter of fact. Humans use it to describe behavior that treats a significant thing as an ordinary thing. It always carries a faint implication of dismissal or denial, as though the person doing the significant thing is refusing to acknowledge its significance. I don't think that's right in this case. I think Adeyemi acknowledged the significance, which I think she had processed the external relay rig, and Ferreira, and The math on the suppression field, all of it. And she had come out the other side into a different cognitive state, one where the significance had been absorbed and the task was still the task. Beth Allen, my word, Le plus her practice. She pulled the suit from the locker, started checking seals. It was at this point that the Sethori senior liaison officer, a tall figure whose name I was documenting as a Rev Sean, crossed the room. I shoot into that the Sethori do not involve themselves in human unit operations. This is doctrine, confirmed in the pre-assignment briefing, reiterated in the coalition protocols. Liaison officers observe and consult. They do not participate in tactical operations outside their function. A Rev Sean had, for the full rotation of contact and standoff, maintained exact positional compliance with this doctrine. She, had stood where she was supposed to stand, reported what she was supposed to report, and said nothing that wasn't asked of her. She stood in front of Adeyemi. "I'll do it," she said. The room made no sound. Adeyemi looked at her. I was rated for external configuration work before I was liaison staff. 7 cycles. Station construction at the rim. Rev Sean didn't elaborate. She had the quality of a person providing minimum viable justification and no more. Adeyemi looked at her for 3 seconds. The look wasn't a challenge. It wasn't suspicion. It was the particular quality of attention she gave to things she was recalibrating around. "Okay," she said. Rev Sean took the suit. I logged this at 0831 and stared at the notation for a long time. Rev Sean, Sethori Senior Liaison, volunteering for extravehicular operation outside doctrinal function. I flagged it. I couldn't decide what the flag was for. I flagged it under behavioral deviation, possible Adeyemi influence. I wasn't entirely sure what I meant by that. I still wrote it down. The EVA took 22 minutes. Plus, I spent those 22 minutes watching the Keth formation on the passive display and the exterior camera on the secondary screen and my own log on the third screen and trying to divide my attention evenly and failing. Osei held his position with the particular focused stillness of someone doing something difficult by not doing anything. Nowak watched the communications console with an intensity that made his usual squint deeper. Adeyemi stood where she could see both screens. She was very still. Humans in motion are easy to document, which humans in stillness are harder. The stillness is doing something, processing, waiting, preparing, but it leaves nothing visible for the log. I noted 0840 and Sergeant Adeyemi motionless at operational viewing position. Has not spoken in 9 minutes. Possibly this is how she looks when she's scared. I deleted that entry immediately, which then I rewrote it. Possibly this is how she looks when she's waiting. The pretty much signal went out at 0853. Rev Sean confirmed relay lock from outside the hull, her voice coming through the suit comms with the characteristic flatness of vacuum transmission. Nowak basically confirmed the transmission signature. The narrowband push went out, stronger this time, better aimed, carrying not just distress, but position data, formation data, tactical assessment. Everything the next ship would need to know before they arrived. At 0856, Adeyemi said something I wasn't expecting. Sort of, not to the room. To herself, nearly quiet, low, the kind of voice people use when they're not quite aware anyone is listening. "We'll take care of it." I logged it at 0856, and then I sat with it for a long time. I sort of heard, initially, the tactical meaning. We've taken the necessary action. We sent the signal. We've done what can be done. A statement of completed task. But it wasn't past tense, which will take care of it. Future. Promise. And she, TBH, wasn't talking about the signal. I think she was talking about Ferreira, about Nowak's expression when he'd said the name, about the rig and what it represented, and the thing that hadn't been said in the room, but was present in every careful silence around it. I think she was telling something, herself, or the room, or the specific weight of all the things that required carrying, that the accounting was still coming, that the incomplete parts hadn't been abandoned. I didn't write any of this in the official log. I wrote it here, in the personal notes section that Command has apparently decided not to redact. At 0901, honestly, the Keth formation shifted again, which faster this time. I guess purposeful. The standoff was over. "Contact in 4 minutes, Osei said." "Right." Adeyemi turned from the screen. Something in her kind of face had changed in the 22 minutes of the EVA and the 9 minutes of stillness. Not hardened, exactly. Resolved, and like a thing that had been undecided had finished deciding. No whack. You know what we did last time? The gap maneuver. They know it now, too. She almost smiled. Just the corners of it. Plus, so we do something different. I logged 0901. Sergeant Adeyemi expressing intention to adapt strategy in real time based on enemy anticipation of previous maneuver. And then, because it was in the personal notes section, I added, I'm not scared the way I was before. I'm not sure what has replaced it. The thing they don't tell you about combat, or the thing I wasn't told, which may not be the same thing, is that it's mostly a sequence of very small decisions made in a very short time, and the thing that separates good outcomes from bad ones is almost never the obvious tactical variable. It's not the firepower differential. It's not the positional advantage. It's actually whether the person making the small decisions is faster than the problem, or whether the problem is faster than them. That comes down to something so far downstream from any briefing document that nobody has found a clean word for it. I've been looking basically for a clean word for it since 0901 ship cycle. The Keth moved in clean formation. I want, well, to be accurate about this. They weren't slow, they weren't careless, and the speed with which they recognized and adapted to the gap maneuver indicated a tactical flexibility isn't seen in any prior documentation of their doctrine. They had 3 vessels to our 1, and they used the numbers well. For what it's worth, overlapping fields of suppression. Staggered approach vectors that minimized our maneuvering options without fully committing any one ship to the lead position. They were trying to be unpredictable, and I guess they were doing it at the exact same moment that Adeyemi was trying to be unpredictable. 2 things trying to be unpredictable to each other at once, in a shrinking volume of space with consequences that were, as the tactical system noted for the second time in this assignment, with what I'd begun to interpret as something almost like resignation, outside favorable projections. What followed I'm going to document as precisely as I can, because several of the details are things I haven't included in the official report for reasons that Command would understand as operational sensitivity and that I understand as something more complicated. I'm including them here because, and this is a thing I have concluded after considerable reflection, incomplete records are their own kind of lie. At 0903, Adeyemi told Osei not to maneuver. I logged this as confusion. A maneuver restriction during an active engagement approach was counter to every piece of tactical guidance I'd encountered. TBH, you move. That's the axiom, and a stationary target is an easier target. You move, you create uncertainty, you make the firing solution harder. Hold, she said. Plus flat. Certain. Let them commit. Osei held. The Keth lead vessel completed its approach vector and committed to a firing position. Adeyemi said now, and Osei moved, and the shot went through empty space where we'd been. More importantly, I guess, this is the part one keep returning to, it revealed the lead vessel's flank. She had baited them, and not with a feint, not with a complex multi-step maneuver sequence. She had simply held still in the place they expected her to vacate until they stopped treating it as bait and committed to the shot, and then she'd moved. The window had been narrow enough that my own processing, reviewing it afterward from the recording, puts the margin at approximately 1.3 seconds. 1.3, kind of second between correct timing and catastrophic hull damage. I logged 0904. Maneuver completed. Favorableutcome. Margin. For what it's worth, approximately 1.3 seconds. And note, Sergeant Adeyemi's decision to hold position rather than maneuver isn't documented in any tactical framework I have reviewed. Query, where does this come from? I didn't answer that question in the log. I didn't answer starting to form, but it felt too large for a log notation and imprecise and the kind of thing that needs more than a timestamp. The flank, exposure on the Keth lead vessel lasted 4 seconds. Enough for Osei to position for the Meridian's weapons officer, a Sethori named Harith who had said very little during the entire assignment and operated the weapons console with a precise and unhurried competence that I found deeply reassuring to complete a targeting solution. The strike disabled the lead vessel's drive array, not destroyed, which disabled. I logged this, at 0904 and added, query, Is disabling rather than destroying the lead vessel intentional? The answer to that came at 0906 when Adeyemi opened a hailing frequency to the Keth formation. I want to be clear about the context here. One Keth vessel disabled. Two functional vessels, still capable of engagement. The Meridian damaged, running below rated capacity. Reinforcements en route, but not yet in range. This wasn't a position of overwhelming strength. This was, by any rational tactical calculus, the moment to press the advantage while you had it, because in 11 minutes the advantage might have reversed. She opened, a hail, which Keth command, this is Sergeant Adeyemi, Coalition vessel Unbroken Meridian. Your lead vessel is disabled. Your remaining vessels are at, she checked the display, approximately 63% combat effectiveness. We have reinforcements in range in 11 minutes. A pause. Small one. We don't want to destroy your people. We want to go home. I'm asking you to stand down. Silence on the frequency. I logged it. 0906. An active honestly. Engagement pause for a verbal ceasefire offer. Tactical justification. Unclear. Ethical justification. Possibly relevant. I looked at the notation, which Nowak was looking at my log. He made the considering sound. She does this, he said quietly. Asks combatants to surrender. Gives them the out. He kept his voice low. Whenever she can. Plus, if the math is there and the timing's right. He looked at the communications display. She says it's practical and saves ammunition. Less cleanup. He said this last part with a slight flatness that suggested less cleanup wasn't the whole explanation, and both of us knew it. At 0908, the Keth formation began withdrawing, which not the two functional vessels abandoning the disabled one. All three, the two functional ships, assuming an escort posture around the lead vessel, pulling back along their original approach corridor in what I recognized after a moment as an organized retreat with their disabled colleague in tow. They weren't leaving anyone behind either. Plus, I noted this at 0908 and then sat very still for a moment. Then, I wrote, the Keth aren't leaving their disabled vessel. Parallel behavior, and stopped because I wasn't sure the comparison was appropriate for an official document, and also because it made something happen in my thoracic cavity that I didn't have a comfortable category for. At 0914, the Meridian's reinforcement contact arrived. 3 coalition vessels, better armed, full complement, the kind of response that makes a 3-ship Keth formation recalculate its options aggressively. The Keth, accelerated their withdrawal. The lead vessel was being towed now, the other 2 running interference. They made the corridor boundary at 0921. The engagement was over. I spent a long time on that phrase. The engagement was over. It had a neatness that felt dishonest. The Meridian was still running on partial power. The port array vibration hadn't stopped. It had shifted pitch, actually, which Nowak said was worse in a technical sense, but better in an immediate structural integrity sense, which was a distinction I found I was too tired to fully parse. The crew was moving through the aftermath sequence, which involved a lot of quiet efficiency and cross-referencing and the kind of systematic order that exists specifically because the alternative to systematic order in the wake of something like this is a certain type of unraveling. Adeyemi was in the middle of it, making notes on her physical paper surface, confirming systems with Vel, talking to TBH, or Revshan, who had returned from the EVA without celebration or commentary, and resumed her liaison position, though something in how she stood had changed slightly, a degree of angle I couldn't precisely quantify, but noticed. At 0944, Commander Hirath's voice came through the repaired communications array. The relay station had picked up her second signal, forwarded it, and Hirath was aboard the lead reinforcement vessel. He ran through the standard engagement debrief questions in the brisk cadence of someone who had already reviewed the transmitted tactical data and was now cross-referencing it against the human. Honestly, Sergeant Adeyemi. Plus, your tactical log shows a non-maneuver hold at 0903 under active approach. Clarify. Waited for them to commit to the shot. That's not a pause on Hirath's end. The pause of someone deciding whether to complete a sentence about doctrine. The margin on that hold was 1.3 seconds, approximately. Another pause. Noted, Hirath said finally. The exchange meant something that I have thought about since. Not the tactical content, the pause. Hirath reviewing the margin and deciding noted was the appropriate response. Not excellent work. Not that sort of was within parameters, just noted. The word that, to be fair, means I have absorbed this, and I'm not sure what to do with it. I know the word well. I pretty much have been in it for the full assignment. After the debrief, the reinforcement vessels took up escort position, and the Meridian began the course plot back toward Coalition space. The drive, in my opinion, shifted to the lower register of transit, which is a more comfortable frequency for my secondary auditory organs. The, I guess, light in the corridors came back to full cycle. Basically, ship started being a ship again instead of a crisis that happened to have a hull. I found Adeyemi in the forward observation bay. She was kind of standing at the viewport. The stars and, I guess, transit approach looked different than at station. The light stretches slightly, a refraction effect from the drive field, and it turns the pinpoints into faint, elongated lines. I documented, I guess. This is a notable visual phenomenon early in the assignment. Now I just stood next to her and looked at it. I'm going to have a lot to write up, I said. Yeah. She didn't look away from the viewport. You got all of it? All of it. She nodded. I looked at my log. One full rotation of entries. Timestamps on everything. The chocolate wrapper and the coffee. The gap maneuver. Plus the hold. The hail to the keth. The way Arevshan's stance had changed. The promise, I said, which she looked at me. What you said, at 0856. Will, for what it's worth, take care of it. She was quiet for a moment. The transit stars stretched. Ferreira, she said. Not a question. I, in my opinion, heard it differently then. I thought it was about the signal, plus kind of the tactic. I paused. I don't think that's what it was. She didn't answer right away. When she did, she wasn't looking at me. She was, in my opinion, still looking at the stars. There's always more to do, she said. More names, plus more unfinished things. A breath. You keep track, and you do the next thing. And then the next one. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. I guess, for words. Different 4 words, but I have been thinking about them alongside the first 4 words, and I think they're related. I think they're the same sentence, actually just different halves of it. I logged them both, which 0956. Sergeant Adeyemi. Then I closed the log and looked at the stars. The transit lines look stretched and held the way things hold when they've been told to. I thought about Arevshan, who had gone outside a hull she had no obligation to touch, and come back changed in some small, unquantifiable way. I thought basically about Nowak and his coffee and the particular quality of probably fine as a working philosophy. I thought about the Keth withdrawing in formation, not leaving their disabled ship behind, whether Adeyemi had expected that, and whether that was why she'd given them the out. I thought about, the word noted. How, it lives in a space between I understand and I can't explain this yet. I'm still in that space. I've been told my secondment report will be reviewed by the Cultural Integration Office and potentially by the Strategic Advisory Council. I've been told to be objective, precise, to document behaviors and draw defensible conclusions. I'm going to do that. I'm also going honestly to include the personal notes section. All of it, including the honestly part about the chocolate. Including the part about what Adeyemi said at 0856. Including this, that whatever a promise means to a human, and I have genuinely looked through every translation index one have access to, and found nothing that fully covers it. It doesn't mean I will try, and it doesn't mean I intend to. It means something that my language, for all its precision, has never needed a word for. Something between I'm already doing it, and this won't be left undone. I've been drafting like a proposal to the linguistic archive for a new entry. I haven't found the right word yet, which I'm still looking.